The spaceship descended slowly, its engines humming softly as it broke through the thin atmosphere of the alien moon. The surface below was barren, a vast expanse of gray rock and dusty plains stretching out endlessly. There were no signs of life, no plants, no animals, nothing but silence and emptiness. Yet, this desolate place had become the stage for what could either be humanity's greatest triumph or its final mistake. Emma Carter stood at the edge of the observation deck, her hands clasped behind her back. She wasn't nervous, not really. Nervousness was something she had learned to push aside long ago. Instead, there was a quiet tension in her posture, a readiness that came from years of training and experience. Her short brown hair framed her face neatly, and her green eyes scanned the landscape below with sharp focus. She didn't say much, never did, but everyone on the crew knew better than to underestimate her. They called her the quiet one, though behind closed doors. They whispered about the stories they'd heard, stories of battles fought on distant colonies, of enemies who thought they could break her only to find themselves broken instead. Beside her stood Daniel Harper, the diplomatic officer tasked with leading the negotiations. He was younger than most people expected, with sandy blonde hair and a boyish charm that made him seem more like a college student than someone responsible for brokering peace between two species. His uniform was crisp and clean, unlike Emma's slightly worn fatigues, which bore faint scorch marks from past missions. Daniel shifted uncomfortably under his own weight, glancing at Emma every now and then as if seeking reassurance. "They're here," he said finally, his voice breaking. The silence. Outside the viewport, another ship had landed a few hundred meters away. It was sleek and metallic, its design unfamiliar yet undeniably advanced. The Valens, the alien species aboard that ship, were known for their cold efficiency and ruthless tactics. Humanity had clashed with them before, and those encounters had ended poorly for Earth's forces. This time, however, things were supposed to be different. This time, they were here to negotiate. Emma didn't respond immediately. She simply watched as the hatch of the alien ship opened, revealing tall figures stepping out into the harsh light of the moon. The Valens towered over humans, their bodies encased in shimmering armor that reflected the dim glow of the distant sun. Their faces were hidden behind masks, angular and intimidating, giving them an almost mechanical appearance. Each movement they made was deliberate, calculated. Like predators sizing up their prey, Commander Zerk emerged first, easily distinguishable by the intricate patterns etched into his armor. He moved with authority, his presence commanding even from a distance. As he approached the human delegation, flanked by several of his subordinates, the air seemed to grow heavier, charged with unspoken tension. When he stopped a few paces away, his voice rang out, deep and resonant, cutting through the eerie stillness. "We have heard much about your kind." Zerk began, tilting his head slightly as if studying each member of the human team. His gaze lingered on Emma longer than anyone else. "Tell me, human girl, have you ever killed?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. It wasn't addressed to Daniel, the diplomat, or to any of the other officers standing nearby. No. It was directed at Emma, and everyone turned to look at her, waiting for her response. For a moment, she didn't move. Her expression remained neutral, unreadable, but then her lips curved upward into a slow, enigmatic grin. It wasn't friendly or warm. It was something darker, something that sent a shiver down the spines of everyone watching. No one spoke. The silence stretched on, growing thicker with each passing second. Even Zerk appeared taken aback, his head tilting further as if trying to decipher the meaning behind her reaction. Daniel cleared his throat nervously, stepping forward in an attempt to regain control of the situation. "Commander Zerk," he started, his voice wavering slightly, "I believe we should begin discussing the terms of our agreement. Surely that is why we are all here today." But Zerk ignored him completely. His attention remained fixed on Emma, his glowing eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "You smile," he observed, his tone curious rather than hostile. "Why?" Emma tilted her head slightly, mirroring his earlier gesture. Her grin widened just a fraction, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm but carried a hint of steel. Maybe I'm just wondering how many of your soldiers I'd need to take down before you'd start taking me seriously." Her words caused a ripple of unease among the human delegation. Some exchanged worried glances, while others shifted uncomfortably where they stood. No one had anticipated such a bold response, least of all Daniel, whose mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he struggled to formulate a reply. Meanwhile, Zerk's posture changed subtly. If anything, he seemed intrigued, leaning forward ever so slightly as if drawn in by her audacity. "You intrigue me, human," Zerk admitted after a pause, his voice low and measured. "Among your kind, you stand apart? Why is that?" Emma shrugged casually, as if discussing the weather rather than answering questions from an alien commander who could annihilate them all with a single order. "Maybe because I've seen things you can't imagine," she replied, her tone deliberately vague. "Things even your kind would find unsettling." Zerk straightened, his armored form towering above her. For a moment it seemed as though he might press further, but instead he turned his attention back to Daniel. "We will continue this discussion later," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Without another word, he gestured for his subordinates to follow him, and the group retreated toward their ship, leaving the humans alone once more. As soon as they were gone, the tension among the crew erupted into a flurry of hushed conversations. Daniel turned to Emma, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. "What was that?" he demanded, keeping his voice low despite the chaos around them. "Do you realize how dangerous it was to antagonize him like that?" Emma raised an eyebrow, her grin fading into a more neutral expression. "Dangerous or effective?" she countered calmly. "He wanted a reaction, and I gave him one. Now he knows I'm not someone to dismiss lightly." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself, shaking his head instead. "Just be careful, okay? We're walking a fine line here." Emma didn't respond. She simply turned back to the viewport, watching as the Valen ship disappeared from sight. Her mind was already working, analyzing every detail of the encounter, the way Zerk had studied her, the subtle shifts in his body language, the curiosity in his voice. Whatever game he was playing, she intended to stay one step ahead. And if that meant letting him see a glimpse of the darkness within her, so be it. Back aboard the human ship, the mood remained tense. The crew gathered in the briefing room, murmuring amongst themselves as they tried to process what had happened. Rumors spread quickly, fueled by fragments of Emma's reputation. Some claimed she had single-handedly wiped out an entire enemy battalion during a previous mission. Others whispered about the scars she carried, not just physical ones, but emotional wounds that ran deeper than anyone could see. Whether these stories were true or exaggerated didn't matter. What mattered was the effect they had on the crew. Fear and respect walked hand in hand when it came to Emma Carter, and today's events had only strengthened both. Meanwhile, aboard the Valen vessel, Zerk convened with his advisors. Holographic displays flickered to life around him, showing footage of the meeting replayed from multiple angles. He paused the recording on Emma's grin, enlarging the image for closer inspection. To the Valens, killing was a logical act, a means to achieve dominance or ensure survival. But there was something primal yet calculated in Emma's expression, something they couldn't quite understand. It fascinated Zerk, sparking a curiosity that bordered on obsession. "She is unlike the others," one of his advisors noted cautiously, his voice tinged with concern. "Perhaps too unpredictable." "Unpredictability is not always a weakness," Zerk replied, his gaze never leaving the hologram. "In fact, it may prove to be her greatest strength and ours if we play this correctly." With that, he dismissed the meeting, retreating to his private quarters to think. For the first time in centuries, Zerk felt uncertain, unsure of how to proceed. But uncertainty, he reminded himself, was merely another challenge to overcome. And challenges, no matter how daunting, were opportunities in disguise. As night fell over the barren moon, the stage was set for a delicate dance of diplomacy and danger. Lines had been drawn, alliances questioned, and reputations tested. All it took was one grin to change everything, and Emma Carter had delivered hers with precision. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: neither side would forget her anytime soon. The human ship was quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ears and made you hyper-aware of every small sound. The hum of the engines and the faint creaks of metal were the only noises breaking the stillness. Emma sat alone in the mess hall, her back to the wall, a tray of synthetic food in front of her. She hadn't touched it. Instead, she stared at the table, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the edge. Around her, the crew moved cautiously, speaking in low tones as if afraid their voices might shatter the fragile calm. Emma's reputation loomed large over the group, even though no one really knew her that well. She didn't share stories or jokes like the others did. She kept to herself, and when she did speak, it was always with purpose. But rumors filled the gaps left by her silence. Some said she had fought on the front lines of colony wars. Others claimed she had single-handedly taken down an entire enemy squad during a raid. There were whispers about scars she carried, both visible and hidden in how they shaped the person she had become. Few dared to ask her directly about her past, and those who did rarely got a straight answer. Daniel Harper approached her cautiously, sliding into the seat across from her. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to start. "You didn't answer him," he said finally, his voice soft but tinged with frustration. "Why not?" Emma glanced up, her green eyes sharp and unreadable. For a moment she just looked at him, studying his face as if trying to decide whether he deserved an explanation. Then she shrugged. "Because he wasn't ready for the truth." Daniel frowned, leaning forward slightly. "What does that mean?" "What truth?" Emma's lips twitched, almost forming a smile, but she stopped herself. "Let's just say I've done things most people wouldn't understand. Things that make them uncomfortable. And Zerk, he's curious now. That's better than being dismissed." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself. He wanted to tell her how reckless she was being, how dangerous it was to provoke someone like Zerk, but something in her tone told him she already knew all of that and didn't care. Instead, he settled for a quieter approach. "Do you think this is helping us? Or are you just making things harder?" Emma leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms loosely. "Harder isn't always bad. Sometimes it gets people's attention, makes them listen." Before Daniel could respond, another crew member interrupted them. Ryan Blake, a lieutenant with broad shoulders and a perpetually scowling expression, stood nearby. His arms were crossed and his dark eyes flicked between Emma and Daniel. "We need to talk," he said bluntly, jerking his head toward the hallway. Emma sighed, standing up without hesitation. "Fine, let's go." Ryan led them to a smaller conference room where two other officers were waiting. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Ryan closed the door behind them and turned to face Emma, his jaw tight. "What exactly are you doing out there?" he demanded, his voice low but carrying an edge of anger. "You're supposed to be part of this team, not some loose cannon trying to show off." Emma raised an eyebrow, unfazed by his aggression. "I'm doing my job," she replied calmly. "If Zerk wants to know what I'm capable of, let him wonder. It keeps him guessing." "Guessing?" Ryan snapped. "You're playing games with an alien species that could wipe us out in seconds if they wanted to. This isn't some training exercise. You're risking all of our lives." Emma's expression hardened, her patience wearing thin. "And what would you have me do? Smile politely and pretend I'm harmless? Because that's not going to work with someone like Zerk. He respects strength, not weakness." "That's not the point." Ryan shot back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "The point is we're here to negotiate peace, not pick fights. Every word you say, every move you make, it reflects on all of us. You're jeopardizing the mission." Emma took a step closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Listen carefully, Lieutenant. I've been in situations like this before. I know how these things work. If Zerk sees me as weak, he'll walk all over us. But if he sees me as a threat, he'll respect us. And right now, respect is the only thing keeping us alive." The room fell silent after her words, the tension palpable. Ryan glared at her, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he struggled to control his temper. Finally, he turned away, muttering under his breath, "Just don't screw this up." Emma watched him leave, her expression unreadable. When the door slammed shut behind him, she turned to Daniel and the other officers. "Anything else?" They shook their heads, clearly uneasy but unwilling to push further. One by one, they filed out of the room, leaving Emma alone. She exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of her nose as if warding off a headache. She hated confrontations like this, not because they scared her, but because they wasted time. Time she could have spent preparing for whatever came next. On the Valen ship, Commander Zerk paced the length of his private chamber, his mind racing. The holographic display of Emma's grin still hovered in the air, frozen in time. He had replayed the footage countless times, analyzing every nuance of her expression. There was something about her that intrigued him, something he couldn't quite put into words. To the Valens, killing was a matter of logic, a means to an end. It was calculated, efficient, and devoid of emotion. Yet Emma's reaction had been different. Her grin had been primal, almost feral, yet laced with intelligence. It was as if she understood violence on a deeper level, one that transcended mere survival. Zerk paused, turning to face his advisor, Grin. "Tell me more about her," he commanded, his voice sharp. "This human girl, what do we know?" Grin hesitated, consulting a datapad before responding. "Her name is Emma Carter. She served in multiple conflicts, often operating independently. Reports suggest she excels in close-quarters combat and tactical planning. Several accounts describe her as ruthless, though details are scarce." "Ruthless?" Zerk repeated, the word rolling off his tongue thoughtfully. "Interesting. Most humans cling to ideals of honor or morality, even in war, but this one, she seems different." Grin nodded cautiously. "It is possible she has adapted to survive in environments where such ideals offer little advantage. However, her unpredictability remains a concern." Zerk waved a hand dismissively. "Unpredictability can be an asset, provided it is managed correctly. I want to meet with her again, privately." Grin's eyes widened slightly, surprise evident in his posture. "Commander, is that wise? Such actions could be perceived as favoritism, or worse, a sign of weakness." "I am not seeking approval," Zerk replied sharply. "I am seeking understanding. This human intrigues me, and I wish to learn more about her perspective. Arrange the meeting." Grin bowed deeply, retreating quickly to carry out the order. Once alone, Zerk returned his attention to the hologram. He tilted his head, studying Emma's grin once more. There was a raw honesty in it, a clarity that resonated with him on a fundamental level. In many ways, she reminded him of himself, someone who had walked through fire and emerged changed, shaped by experiences too harsh for others to comprehend. As the hours passed, preparations were made for the private meeting. A neutral location was chosen, a small, dome-shaped structure erected on the moon's surface, designed to facilitate secure communication. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, the walls lined with transparent panels that offered a view of the desolate landscape outside. Emma arrived first, stepping inside with deliberate calm. She wore her usual fatigues, her posture relaxed yet alert. When Zerk entered moments later, accompanied by 2 guards, she didn't flinch. The Valen commander studied her for a long moment, his glowing eyes scanning her form. "You intrigue me, human," he began, his voice steady. "In our previous encounter, you spoke of deeds that unsettle even my kind. Tell me, what drives you?" Emma met his gaze evenly, her expression unreadable. "Survival," she answered simply. "Doing whatever it takes to stay alive, to protect the people I care about." Zerk tilted his head, considering her response. "And yet, you smile when asked of killing. Why?" Emma's lips curved upward slightly, though the smile lacked warmth. "Because it's funny, in a way. People think they understand violence, but they don't. They romanticize it, turn it into something noble or tragic. But the truth is, it's messy and ugly and unavoidable. And sometimes," she paused, her grin widening just a fraction, "sometimes it feels good." Zerk's eyes narrowed, though not in anger. If anything, he seemed impressed. "You are honest, at least. Many of your kind hide behind lies, pretending to be something they are not. But you embrace who you are?" Emma shrugged, her tone casual. "Pretending takes too much effort." Besides, it doesn't fool anyone in the end. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy yet strangely comfortable. Zerk broke it eventually, his voice softer than before. There is strength in your honesty, human. Perhaps more than you realize. Emma raised an eyebrow, surprised by the compliment coming from you. That almost sounds like praise. It is, Zerk confirmed, though I suspect you will not accept it easily. Emma chuckled softly, shaking her head. Let's just say I've learned not to trust compliments. They usually come with strings attached. Zerk regarded her thoughtfully, his expression unreadable behind his mask. Perhaps? But trust is earned, not given freely. And you, Emma? Carter may yet earn mine. With that, he turned and left, his guards following closely behind. The next round of negotiations began under a heavy cloud of suspicion. The human delegation gathered in the same neutral dome where Emma had met Zerk privately. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. Tension crackled like static electricity, and everyone seemed to be watching everyone else. Daniel Harper stood at the center of the group, clutching his notes tightly as if they were a lifeline. His nervous energy was palpable, but he tried to project confidence for the sake of the team. Emma lingered near the back of the group, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She didn't say much, but her presence alone seemed to command attention. The crew glanced at her often, their eyes darting between her and the entrance where the Valens would soon appear. No one knew what to expect, not after the private meeting, not after the rumors that had spread like wildfire since then. Some whispered that Emma had struck a deal with Sark. Others feared she might have revealed too much about Earth's weaknesses. But no one dared ask her directly. When the Valens arrived, their entrance was as imposing as ever. Commander Zerk led the way, his towering form casting long shadows across the floor. His armor gleamed under the artificial lights, and his glowing eyes swept over the humans with sharp precision. He stopped a few paces away from Daniel, his voice resonating through the chamber. "Your kind are weak," he declared bluntly, his tone carrying both disdain and curiosity. "Yet this one," he gestured toward Emma, "stands apart. Why is that?" All eyes turned to Emma, who straightened slightly but didn't step forward. Her green eyes locked onto Zerk's mask, unflinching. "Maybe because I've seen things you can't imagine," she replied calmly, her voice steady. "Things even your kind would find unsettling." Zerk tilted his head, intrigued. "Unsettling? Explain." Emma leaned forward slightly, her tone laced with steel. "Honor doesn't win wars, Commander. And strategy only gets you so far. Sometimes you just need to be willing to do whatever it takes." Her words sent a ripple through the room. The human crew exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to feel proud or terrified of her boldness. The Valen advisors shifted uncomfortably, their glowing eyes flickering with uncertainty. Zerk, however, seemed more fascinated than offended. He studied Emma for a long moment before speaking again. "You speak of actions without morality. Yet morality is what separates us from chaos." Emma smirked faintly, her grin carrying an edge of dark humor. "Morality is a luxury most people can't afford when they're fighting for their lives. Ask yourself, Commander, how many of your own rules have you broken to stay on top?" Zerk's posture stiffened slightly, though his expression remained unreadable behind his mask. It was clear that Emma's question struck a nerve for all. His talk of logic and dominance, he couldn't deny that his rise to power had been marked by brutal choices that haunted him still. Emma saw the flicker of unease in his glowing eyes and pressed further. "You think you're so different from me? Maybe we're not as far apart as you'd like to believe." The room fell silent after her words, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Daniel cleared his throat nervously, attempting to steer the conversation back toward diplomacy. "Commander Zerk, perhaps we should focus on the terms of our agreement. Surely that is why we are here today." But Zerk ignored him, his attention fixed solely on Emma. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice low and measured. "You intrigue me, human. I wish to know more of your perspective." Before Daniel could protest, Zerk requested another private meeting with Emma. The request caught the human leadership off guard, sparking heated debates among the crew. Lieutenant Ryan Blake argued fiercely against it, insisting that Emma was jeopardizing the mission by fraternizing with the enemy. Others, however, pointed out that Zerk's interest in her could be used to humanity's advantage. In the end, reluctant approval was granted, though not without conditions. 2 guards would accompany Emma to ensure her safety and to keep an eye on her. Inside the dome, Emma faced Zerk once more. This time, there were no holograms or formalities, just the 2 of them sitting across from each other at a small table. The air was cool and sterile, the silence pressing against their ears. Zerk leaned forward slightly, his glowing eyes studying her intently. "Tell me of your kills," he demanded, his voice carrying both curiosity and challenge. "Were they honorable, strategic?" Emma's lips curved into a slow, enigmatic grin, the same grin that had unsettled everyone during their first encounter. She leaned back in her chair, her expression calm but laced with steel. "Honor and strategy are nice words, Commander, but they don't always matter when you're staring down the barrel of a gun." Zerk tilted his head, clearly intrigued. "Explain." Emma hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "There was a colony once a small outpost on the edge of nowhere. We thought we were safe, but we were wrong. The enemy hit us hard, faster than anyone expected. They took hostages, used them as shields. By the time reinforcements arrived, it was too late for most of them." Her voice softened slightly, tinged with something akin to regret. "I was one of the last ones standing. When the order came to retreat, I stayed behind. I told myself it was to buy time for the others, but deep down, I knew the truth. I wanted revenge." Zerk listened silently, his glowing eyes never leaving hers. "And did you succeed?" Emma nodded, her grin returning, darker this time. "I burned the place to the ground, every last one of them. It wasn't pretty, and it sure as hell wasn't honorable, but it worked." For a long moment, Zerk said nothing. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable behind his mask. Then slowly he leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxing ever so slightly. "You remind me of myself," he admitted, his voice quieter than before. "In my youth, I made choices that earned me power but also cost me peace. I see the same weight in your eyes." Emma raised an eyebrow, surprised by the admission. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," Zerk replied bluntly. "It is merely an observation. You carry scars, both visible and hidden." "As do I." Emma studied him carefully, her expression softening just a fraction. "So what now? Are we bonding over our shared baggage?" Zerk let out a low, mechanical sound that might have been laughter. "Perhaps, or perhaps we are learning from each other. Understanding breeds respect, does it not?" Emma shrugged, her tone casual but carrying an edge of sincerity. "If that's what you're looking for, fine. Just don't expect me to start singing campfire songs." Zerk tilted his head, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Campfire songs?" "Never mind," Emma muttered, shaking her head. "Human thing." The conversation continued for a while longer, shifting from war stories to broader discussions about survival and sacrifice. Both Emma and Zerk found themselves opening up in ways they hadn't anticipated, revealing glimpses of their true selves beneath the masks they wore. For Emma, it was a rare moment of vulnerability, one she hadn't allowed herself in years. For Zerk, it was an opportunity to confront the ghosts of his past, to acknowledge the cost of his ambitions. When the meeting finally ended, Emma returned to the human ship feeling strangely lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The crew greeted her with wary looks, their suspicions still simmering beneath the surface. Lieutenant Ryan Blake approached her immediately, his scowl deeper than ever. "What did you tell him?" he demanded, his voice low but carrying an edge of accusation. Emma met his gaze evenly, her expression unreadable. "Nothing that concerns you." Ryan clenched his fists, his temper flaring. "You're playing games with an alien species that could destroy us all? How can you be so reckless?" Emma stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Reckless? Or effective? Think about it, Lieutenant." Zerk respects strength, not weakness. If he sees me as someone to fear, he'll respect us too. That's how this works. Ryan opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself, shaking his head in frustration. Just don't screw this up, he muttered before storming off as the hours passed. Subtle changes began to emerge in Zerk's behavior during official talks. He seemed more open to compromise, his advisors visibly confused by his softened stance. Though progress remained fragile, hope flickered for the first time since the mission began. Emma noticed the shift and couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. She had left her mark not just on Zerk, but on the entire negotiation process. That night, as Emma lay in her bunk, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers, but for the first time in a long while she felt a flicker of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, understanding could be found in the unlikeliest of places, even between a human soldier and an alien commander. The days that followed were tense but productive. The negotiations between the humans and the Valens began to take on a new tone, one that felt less like a standoff and more like a fragile attempt at understanding. Zerk's behavior had shifted noticeably. He was still calculating and authoritative, but there was a subtle softening in his approach. He listened more intently during discussions, his glowing eyes lingering on Emma whenever she spoke. It wasn't just respect. It was something deeper, an acknowledgement of a shared experience that transcended their species' differences. Emma noticed the change too, though she didn't comment on it. She kept her focus sharp, her words deliberate. Every time Zerk pressed for clarification or offered a compromise, she responded with the same calm confidence that had unnerved him from the start. Her presence became a stabilizing force in the talks, even as tensions simmered among her own crew. While some saw her growing rapport with Zerk as a sign of progress, others viewed it with suspicion. Convinced she was crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed, Lieutenant Ryan Blake was the loudest voice of dissent. He couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was playing a dangerous game, one that could cost them everything. She's getting too close to them, he muttered to anyone who would listen. Too cozy. What happens when they decide they don't need us anymore? His concerns spread like wildfire through the ship, fueling unease among the crew. Whispers echoed in the corridors, and side glances became frequent whenever Emma passed by. Some accused her of losing sight of her loyalty to humanity, while others worried that her actions might provoke the Valens into retaliation. But despite the growing tension, no one dared confront her directly. Not after witnessing how she handled herself in front of Zerk. Daniel Harper tried to mediate the situation, pulling Emma aside one evening in the mess hall. "You know people are talking, right?" he asked cautiously, his tone gentle but firm. "They're worried about where this is going." Emma glanced up from her tray of synthetic food, her green eyes sharp and unreadable. "Let them talk," she replied simply. "What matters is what happens in that dome, not what they think in here." "But it's not just idle chatter," Daniel pressed. "Ryan's planning something. I overheard him talking to a few others about, well, removing you from the equation." Emma's expression didn't change, but a flicker of amusement crossed her face. "Removing me? How exactly does he plan to do that?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, running a hand through his sandy blonde hair. "But you need to be careful. If he thinks you're jeopardizing the mission, he won't hesitate to act." Emma leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms loosely. "Then let him try. He'll find out soon enough that I'm not someone you can push around." Daniel sighed, shaking his head. "This isn't a game, Emma. Lives are at stake here, including yours." Emma's grin returned, faint but carrying an edge of steel. "Exactly, which is why I'm doing what needs to be done. If Zerk respects me, he'll respect us. And that's the only way we're walking away from this alive." The confrontation came sooner than expected. Ryan Blake cornered Emma in the cargo bay late one night, his dark eyes blazing with anger. Two other officers stood behind him, their expressions grim. Emma didn't look surprised to see them. If anything, she seemed almost bored. She leaned casually against a stack of crates, her arms crossed as she waited for Ryan to speak. You've gone too far, Ryan growled, stepping closer until he towered over her. Fraternizing with the enemy, undermining the mission. Do you even care about what happens to the rest of us? Emma tilted her head slightly, her grin widening just a fraction. Funny, I thought I was the one keeping us alive. Ryan clenched his fists, his temper flaring. Don't play games with me. You're a liability, and I won't let you ruin everything we've worked for. With that, he pulled a small sidearm from his belt, aiming it squarely at her chest. The two officers behind him shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Emma didn't move. She simply stared at Ryan, her expression calm and unflinching. Go ahead, she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of mockery. Pull the trigger, see how far that gets you. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was deafening, broken, only by the faint hum of the ship's engines. Ryan's finger hovered over the trigger, his jaw tight with indecision. He wanted to believe he was doing the right thing, that eliminating Emma would save the mission. But deep down, he knew it. Wouldn't it would only make things worse. Before he could act, a sudden movement caught everyone's attention. Commander Zerk stepped into the cargo bay, his towering form casting long shadows across the floor. His glowing eyes locked onto Ryan, radiating authority and menace. Lower your weapon, Zerk commanded, his voice resonating like grinding steel. Ryan froze, his grip on the gun faltering. Stay out of this, he snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me deeply, Zerk countered, taking another step forward. Emma Carter is under my protection. Harm her, and you harm our agreement. The room fell silent after his words, the tension thick enough to choke on. Ryan hesitated, his gaze darting between Zerk and Emma. Finally, he lowered the weapon, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Without another word, he turned and left, the two officers trailing behind him like shadows. When they were gone, Zerk turned his attention to Emma. Are you unharmed? He asked, his tone softer than before. Emma nodded, her grin returning, this time tinged with gratitude. I'm fine. Thanks for the assist. Zerk tilted his head, his glowing eyes studying her intently. You did not require assistance. Why did you allow this to happen? Emma shrugged, her tone casual. Sometimes you have to let people show their true colors. Now we know who's really on our side and who isn't. Zerk considered her words for a moment before nodding. Slowly, a wise decision. Though I suspect your crew will not forget this easily. They don't have to, Emma replied calmly. All that matters is that you understand where I stand. Zerk's posture relaxed slightly, his glowing eyes softening ever so subtly. I do, and perhaps now they will as well. The incident forced the human crew to confront their biases and fears. In the days that followed, the atmosphere aboard the ship shifted. Ryan Blake and his faction kept their distance, their hostility tempered by shame and uncertainty. Others began to see Emma in a new light, not just as a soldier, but as someone willing to take risks for the greater good. Even Daniel seemed more confident in her decisions, trusting her instincts in ways he hadn't before. As the final treaty approached completion, Zerk requested one last private meeting with Emma. They met in the same dome where their earlier conversations had taken place, the air cool and sterile. Zerk stood by the transparent wall, gazing out at the barren moonscape beyond. When Emma entered, he turned to face her, his glowing eyes filled with quiet admiration. You remind me of myself, he admitted, his voice low and measured. But perhaps we can learn from each other instead of repeating old mistakes. Emma raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sentiment. Is that your way of saying thanks? Zerk tilted his head, his expression unreadable behind his mask. It is my way of acknowledging that you have earned my respect. Something few have achieved? Emma smirked faintly, her tone laced with humor. Well, don't get all mushy on me now. Zerk let out a low, mechanical sound that might have been laughter. Rest assured, human, I am still very much myself. As the meeting ended, Emma returned to the human ship feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. The mission wasn't perfect, and challenges still lay ahead. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope, a belief that understanding could bridge even the widest gaps. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. She had forged a bond that neither fear nor prejudice could break. That night, as Emma lay in her bunk, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The road ahead was uncertain, but she faced it with a renewed sense of purpose. For better or worse, she had changed the course of history not just for herself, but for both species. And as sleep finally claimed her, a faint smile lingered on her lips, a reminder of the journey she had begun and the battles yet to come. The final treaty signing took place in the same neutral dome where so many pivotal moments had unfolded. The air inside was tense but charged with a cautious optimism. Both sides stood on either side of a long table, their representatives ready to put pen or claw to paper. Emma Carter stood near the back of the human delegation, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She didn't say much, but her presence loomed large over the proceedings. Commander Zerk approached the table first, his towering form commanding attention. His glowing eyes swept over the humans, lingering briefly on Emma before he turned to address Daniel Harper. "This agreement marks a new beginning," Zerk declared, his voice resonating through the chamber. "It is not based on trust, for trust takes time to build. But it is built on respect, and that is enough for now." Daniel nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he held the treaty document. "We agree to uphold these terms and work toward lasting peace," he replied, his voice steady despite his nerves. With careful precision, he signed his name on the designated line. When it was Zerk's turn, he extended one armored hand, his claws leaving faint impressions as they traced across the paper. The act felt symbolic, a blending of two worlds, each marked by its own strengths and scars. As the ceremony concluded, murmurs of relief rippled through the human crew. Some exchanged smiles or patted each other on the back, while others simply exhaled deeply, as if releasing breaths they hadn't realized they were holding. For all the challenges they had faced, they had achieved something remarkable, a fragile but real chance at coexistence. Yet amidst the quiet celebration, Emma remained still, watching silently as the Valens prepared to leave. Before stepping into their ship, Zerk approached Emma one last time. The rest of the crew watched nervously from a distance, unsure of what to expect. Zerk stopped a few paces away, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. "You remind me of myself," he admitted, his tone softer than usual. "But perhaps you are stronger than I ever was." Emma raised an eyebrow, her grin returning faintly. "Coming from you, that almost sounds like praise." "It is," Zerk confirmed, "though I suspect you will not accept it easily." Emma chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Let's just say I've learned not to get too comfortable with compliments. They usually come with strings attached." Zerk tilted his head, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Perhaps? But trust is earned, not given freely. And you, Emma Carter, have earned mine." With that, he turned and walked toward his ship, his advisors following closely behind. As the hatch closed and the engines roared to life, the human delegation watched in silence as the sleek vessel ascended into the sky. For a moment, no one moved, the weight of what had just happened settling over them like a heavy blanket. Back aboard the human ship, the mood shifted once again. The crew gathered in the briefing room, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Daniel Harper stood at the front, addressing the group with a sense of pride. "We did it," he said, his voice carrying a hint of disbelief. "Against all odds, we made it happen." Applause broke out, though it was subdued more out of relief than jubilation. Emma leaned against the wall near the back of the room, her arms crossed and her expression calm. She didn't join in the applause, nor did she seek recognition. Instead, she listened quietly as Daniel recounted the events leading up to the treaty, emphasizing the importance of unity and perseverance. When the meeting ended, Daniel approached Emma, his boyish smile returning. "You really scared them back there, didn't you?" he asked, his tone lighthearted. Emma glanced at him, her grin widening just a fraction. "Good, maybe now they'll think twice before underestimating us." Daniel laughed softly, shaking his head. "I don't know how you do it, Emma, but whatever it is, it works." Emma shrugged, her tone casual. "Just doing my job." Before Daniel could respond, Lieutenant Ryan Blake appeared nearby, his scowl deeper than ever. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer, his posture stiff. "I wanted to say something," he began awkwardly, his voice low. "About earlier, in the cargo bay." Emma raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "Go on." Ryan clenched his fists, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I acted out of fear," he admitted finally. "Fear of losing control, of being left behind. I thought you were jeopardizing everything, but I was wrong." Emma studied him carefully, her green eyes sharp and unflinching. "Fear makes people do stupid things," she replied simply. "But it also gives them a chance to learn. What happens next is up to you." Ryan nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly in relief. "Thank you," he muttered before turning and walking away. As the crew dispersed, Emma found herself alone. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment as she let the weight of everything sink in. It had been a long journey, filled with challenges and dangers that tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated. But through it all, she had stayed true to herself, ruthless when necessary, compassionate when possible, and always willing to do whatever it took to protect those she cared about. Later that evening, Emma stood at the viewport, gazing out at the endless expanse of stars. The ship hummed softly around her, its engines carrying them steadily toward home. Behind her, Daniel joined her quietly, leaning against the railing as he followed her gaze. "Do you think it'll last?" he asked after a while, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "The peace, I mean." Emma didn't answer immediately. She simply watched the stars, her mind replaying the events of the past weeks, the battles fought, the alliances forged, the lives changed forever. Finally she spoke, her tone calm but carrying an edge of resolve. "Peace isn't something you achieve and forget about. It's something you fight for, every single day. If both sides are willing to put in the effort, it might last. If not," she trailed off, shrugging slightly, "then we'll deal with it when it comes." Daniel nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You're probably right. Still, it's nice to hope for the best, isn't it?" Emma smirked faintly, her grin softening just a fraction. "Hope is fine as long as you're ready for anything." They stood there in companionable silence for a while longer, the vastness of space stretching out before them like an open canvas. For Emma, it was a reminder of how small they all were in the grand scheme of things, and yet how much impact a single choice could have. Whether it was a grin, a word, or an action, the smallest moments could change the course of history. As the ship continued its journey home, Emma allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The road ahead would be uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of optimism, a belief that understanding could bridge even the widest gaps. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: she had forged a bond that neither fear nor prejudice could break, and as sleep finally claimed her later that night, a faint smile lingered on her lips, a quiet acknowledgement of the battles won, the lessons learned, and the promise of a brighter future.